Okay, so in this video, what we want to do is actually try to break down a little bit on how the client-side web part is put together, and do just play around with some of the properties here, the web part properties. So one of the things that I noticed since our last video, I went ahead, I kind of screwed up my hello world a little bit. I kind of added properties. It's actually working, but for this video, I wanted to go back to the starting point of where we kind of left off in the previous video. So I went ahead and created one web part and just called it Deshaun's World instead of Hello World, and really started to play around with it because I wanted to walk through this video of like updating the properties and different property types. Now, the way that this is put together, let me go ahead and collapse some of these sections so that way we can get a closer look at it. Is that this import section is going to be very similar to using statements and setting global variables. So like this line right here, import styles. It imports, it makes a reference to this SCSS file, SAS file, and then set the styles to, it seems like it's setting the styles to this local local variable here. The same with Deshaun World strings. That's being pulled in from this one here. So this interface here, and then it sets a local module, which I believe is acting like it seems like a function of sorts, and this is the whole syntax piece. So, really looking at the syntax and determine if it's a object, method, function, or global variable, wherever the case may be. That's something that I just have to get up to speed with just understanding the JavaScript and Typescript, or whatever is just kind of driving this pattern. But so this is just kind of like an import, and then it says from SP client, and then if you go through the node modules, and then there's an at Microsoft, and then you can just scroll down till you see the SP client preview. And then in here, it just has a bunch of items here. I'm not sure which one of these files return the actual class, but all these property definite class definition, interface definitions seem to be pulling from this path here. And then you have another example of that here, and it seems to be set in this local interface or variable reference here. So when we get down to the class, and this is very similar to like the web part class in Visual Studio, to where you have a web part that web part class that represents the web part, and this is that major class here, and then underneath that you have a constructor that's going to, I guess, initiate the object based on the parent class, and then we're passing in these this interface for web props. And as we start to add properties, this interface is going to become important, because as we add in properties, we're going to have to be constantly updating that guy there. Now, the render piece, I think this is pretty straightforward. This seems like it's using straight. Remember when we created the web part and it said no JavaScript or React or Knockout, and it seems as if this section here is what it's referring to in the sense of what it's going to use as far as the language to interact with some of this, interact with some of the JavaScript within the TypeScript. And this seems like plain old JavaScript, or plain old JavaScript, where you have the DOM element and then the inner HTML, and you're really just setting all this div HTML here. As I mentioned in the previous video, I'm not a big fan with having all this HTML embedded in JavaScript. I think that's one of the things that kind of drove me crazy with the display templates in SharePoint 2013, and even in on the cloud. And I'm hoping, with this new modern UI and design, they kind of refactor those display templates to come more of this model. Well, not this model per se, but just standard JavaScript. And then I can use like an Angular template or something like that, and then bring all that HTML in programmatically, or real time. So so that's the render section. This seems to be like the page load event, or the page render event, or the render that's going to execute. And what it's doing here, you see that styles, object here is coming from this styles object that's set here. And then you look at the Sean world. Oh, hold on, let me collapse all this. Let me get back to the web part, set of files. So you have this interface, what it would say, this styles, and then that's going to come from this module that's SCSS, and this looks like the SAS definition here, and then you also have a TypeScript file that represents the SAS, and I think it's actually this styles code here that's actually been rendered. So you got the Sean's world, and that gives you all the class definitions for that. So the Sean's world, then there's another one for container, and then there's one for row. So if you look into these respective properties on this object, you can see the string representation, and I assume this is the SAS notation with that underscore. And maybe once this is rendered, I suspect this is going to be like list item space, and then maybe not, or yeah, maybe that's the class name. I'm not, the CSS class name, I'm not sure. So maybe we can look at the view source. But anyway, that's where those styles properties are coming from. And then for this type dot properties, that's all being picked up by this pane here. So these are going to be your web part properties when you're actually viewing the web part. And this is the section I really want to play around with. So to get started, basically what I've done, really just kind of hacking away at this and then referring to the documentation as I went along. I really wanted to say, okay, let me see if I can figure out how can I add a property from scratch, and scratch as far as like copying what's here, but renaming it so that way I had a feel or of the flow of how everything kind of tied together. So basically what I'm doing, I'm copying this property pane, and this is a text field, and this is going to define the type for the property, the web part property. And then here I'm gonna just call this the Sean, right? And then for the label, I'm gonna hack into this, and I'm gonna just hard string this one and say the Sean's custom label. And then it's also good to see exactly where this is going to be rendered on the web part itself. So let's go. Let's step through. I know some of this is not going to work because everything is not wired up, but I think it'd be good to kind of get the error and fix it, just so that way we're clear on where things are coming from. So all I did was copy that line of code there, hit the Sean's world. Nothing. I'm sorry. Yeah, the web part. So so this block right here, as we've seen in the previous video, is coming directly from this render HTML. So that's where that block is coming from. And then you would notice that customize SharePoint, the Sean's world, that's actually being picked up by this guy here. That's the property value for the description property. So let me do this. And that's pretty cool. You can actually just inject, HTML and no special tags to separate it or make it render. These are really true tokens, and it'll be interesting to see, once we go to the React project, how this whole, text to JavaScript variable works. So I'm gonna save this. I just did a Control S, and then this guy pops up. So there you can see the description, and that guy is just directly pulling in from this guy here. Okay. Now here's my guy. This is test Deshaun, but I am not. This is my new property, right? So by adding it here only, as far as like defining the property, I was able to get it in the pane. But in order to use it, we're going to have to go to another step. So let me just copy this HTML here, right? Go ahead and new line. Let me do my manual indenting because we're mixing and matching here. Now I'm gonna do Deshaun prop, right? Now this kind of threw me for a loop when I was playing around with it. I did not realize that this string here represent the property from this collection, right? So when you do a dot, and this is pretty cool with the Typescript, you get the IntelliSense, just like Visual Studio C#, right? You get the IntelliSense that says, hey, these are available properties or options available, but you notice Deshaun is not there. Now, this is where we take this another step. So in order to define Deshaun, you're going to have to go to these web prop TypeScripts here and define the string, define the property, and then give it a type. And I don't know if this is the return type or, typing it as a, as you would a variable in C#. So now that's there. And let me just hit Control S to save it. And then I go back to the web part, and now I hit dot, and then you can see Deshaun pop up. Now if I save this, let's see if I get an actual value. So Deshaun prop test Deshaun. And then you come in here, and then as I'm typing, you can see it's being updated. So that's all plugged in and ready to go. Now this guy here, this is the label, right? And this is the one that I hard coded here. So Deshaun's custom label. But what they've done in the template, they're using a string object, right? And then when that object, they're using these properties. And I did some digging. I found out that this string object is coming from the mystrings Typescript file or component. I think these are called components. I'm gonna tighten up on the language. I'm gonna actually do some tutorials on, right? But I think this is in this component file, you have the Deshaun world string module defined. But then above this, you have this interface with all the different labels. So if what I wanted to do, if I want to come here and define, and I assume these are called members or properties. If I want to define, let's say Deshaun's label, Deshaun field label, right? And then I'm gonna type it as a string. I'm just copying, the same pattern that they have here. And then I'm gonna copy this just to make sure that I have the casing and then the casing and then the spelling correctly. So then I'm just going ahead into strings dot Deshaun field label, right? So that's going to set that up for me as a label. Now, TypeScript error, build error. This is interesting. I haven't received that before. There's a couple of things that I'm noticing here, and I can't explain it, but I see what's going on here, but I don't understand why how these two are tied together. So you're kind of using this enus as like a resource file where you just kind of define these global variables or objects, string objects, and then based on these properties, right, it would return this field. And if you were doing multi-language or different locale or what have you, you can come up here and then put Spanish or Mandarin or whatever the case may be. So let me just put in Deshaun's label, and I'm gonna have to go back and get the proper the right name for that. Let's see, Deshaun's label. Why is it crying? Because of do? Wow, that's nice. Let's tell you, in plain JavaScript, you just don't get this type of love. Okay, so I'm gonna just take this guy here, copy it. Oh yeah, and that's another thing. There's a lot of copying and pasting in JavaScript. I would not trust my fingers to get this right. Let's see here. There we go. That's what we need. All right, so I'll save this all. All right, I think my build error went away. Let's see, I'll save this off. Okay, so now we're here. And then if you look in edit mode, Deshaun's label field. Is that right? Let's see, what do we call it? Deshaun label. All right, Deshaun labels field for real. Really though. Okay, so let's go back here. All right, so now we're all wired up. Now, let me kill this because there's one other thing they're doing that wasn't clear until I was actually trying to go through the process. But before I show you this other piece, so let's go in here and add an additional property, right? This is what I want to show you now, the undefined. So basically, what they're doing is that they have you have all these properties and all this other good stuff defined here in the web part property section. And then somewhere, I know where now, but before I was scratching my head, I was like, where are they setting these default values? And then if you go into this manifest.json, this is where they set the default value. And if you look at the web part, at first I was taking this Deshaun field label and then setting the default value there, but that wasn't correct. The default value is based off the actual property name, the same property name that I'm using here in this format here. So this dot properties dot Deshaun, and then this will return whatever value. No, and this is actually just the label. It's not the text box value, right? So what I'm setting is the label for the text box, but not the actual value that comes inside of the text box. And that's going to be the value for this property. And it took me a little bit to understand what was going on. So now if I go into manifest, what I want to do is just copy this guy, put a comment in because I'm adding an additional, right? Oops, no. So this is my duplicate name, check. And then this will have to be Deshaun. So this is going to be this value here that you specify for the property name, and which is the exact same one that you're using here. So now I'm going to save this all, and then I'll go to the manifest, save this all. And then that's another thing in Visual Studio Code. If you have multiple files open like I have, and then there's a file that has a change that hasn't been saved, you're going to get that solid circle. All right, so that's done. I saved it off. It's refreshed. We didn't catch it, but it did refresh in the background. I'm gonna add in a new web part, and I still get undefined. And this is where I was like, oh, I still don't have it right. I still don't have it right until I realized, and I remember this from developing in Ionic and working with gulp serve there, that some changes very similar to Visual Studio Code, some changes you just would not get in real time and live, even though you got the live reload in, you're not going to get some of those changes live. So what you're going to have to do is go to exit out, and I had to Google this one. It's Control C to get out of the gulp serve, and then you get this option to say yes, terminate job. Oops, I said no, but it looked like it terminated anyway, right? And then just do another gulp serve. And then basically, I guess, based on where the manifest lives within the cycle process, it seems is outside of that live reload to where you actually have to reload the project. Now, once I do that, I get this Deshaun's world, right? So, which is this guy. And I assume, let's try this. Deshaun's world default, right? Let's go ahead and save that. Again, I'm not going to see that here. Even if I add another web part, no web part instance, I'm not going to see that here. It's kind of stuck using that last value before the change. Do a Control C, and then yes to exit, and then I go to gulp serve again. This should launch. Yeah, I think it always launches a new instance of the tab. And now there we go. Now I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable. All right, so that the change is actually taken into effect. All right. Okay, so now let's add in some different property types. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and just exit out here. So just do a Control C and then yes to terminate, and then get back here to my web part module or component. Now, basically, you have these text field types, but looking at the tutorial, there are actually several other property pane types. One is property pane text field, so text field type. And then what you can do is that you can come down here. This has a multi-line. Oh, I have to hit for IntelliSense to work correctly, you have to make sure you're hitting the right commas in that. So multi-line, I'm just doing Control Space Bar, right? And then I can set this to true or false, right? So once I set this to true, let me just, maybe I can just stay in gulp serve. I don't know why I exit out. You know why I exit out? Because I'm so used to debug mode in Visual Studio and C#, and then you get that error when you're in debug mode and you're trying to modify the code. So I'm just so accustomed to that. So, so we have this guy here. I changed, oops. Oh, they got that one wired up. So I changed this text box to multi-line, and as you can see now, I have a nice size text box. I can put in a lot of text there, but it's still a text field, so nothing else needed to change. I just updated the property for it. Now, another guy that they have, if you're looking at tutorial, so that's the multi-line one. They have this checkbox one. So this is one we're going to add in from scratch. Now, when I copy and paste this, obviously you want to copy at the comma, and then come over here and add in a comma to series them together, and then remove the comma. All right, so maybe that's not a good deal. But anyway, that's not a good paste. This now I'm getting a red squiggly, and this is going to be a syntax error. It says, hey, cannot find this. So basically what you have to do is go and define these guys at the top. So you say, hey, I'm using this this class type is not brought in. I didn't import it. Very similar to the same concepts of what C# and Visual Studio, whereas, you know, any class that you bring in, if it's not part of that namespace, you have to bring in a proper namespace. So now this guy is brought in, test 1. This is not going to work, right? I mean, we have the same issue that we have with Deshaun in the previous text field. So we have to go to, you got it, the world web part props, come here, define it as a, oh wait, now I define it as a string, but is it really a string? This is a checkbox, and checkbox I believe is Boolean type. So this is going to be a yes or no for me. So this has to be Boolean, all right? And I don't know, see, and this is another thing, like capital, oh, this is an interface, and I guess this is a type. So we're going to do lowercase there, put in your semicolon, and what else? I think it may actually work. So let me save this. There's my solid dot. So let me go here. Let me save this. And then go back to this guy. Hit edit. And there we go. So there's your checkbox. All right. The other one. Now, if you want to be checked by default, right, you would just go into the manifest for that property name, which is test 1, and then set, this has to be in double quotes. And this is another thing I know is going to trip me up, when to use the quote notation versus the non-quote, I guess, you know, definition versus or a reference. So in this double quote, because that's a Boolean value, you're just going to type in the value true with no quotes, you know, not a string value. And then, you know, as we go here, because, you know, we already been playing around with it, we're not going to see a change. Add in a new instance, it's not going to be checked, because we already talked about that in order for this to work correctly, you have to do a Control C, get out, stop the gulp thingy. Yeah, that's, and thingy is a very technical word. All right, and then do a gulp serve to get it back. Make sure it's picking up changes from all of the files. Come here, go into edit, and we should have a default checkbox. All right, so that's working as expected. All right, what else do we want to take a look at? So there's the checkbox, and then you have this drop down, and then you have the toggle on or off. So let's do the drop down one. And then again, you have to make sure you're grabbing these guys from the right place. I'm gonna try to get a little fancy. I'm gonna put a semicolon, a comment at the beginning, and I'm omit the comment at the end. and see if I can get my paste to work as expected. All right, good. So we're good so far. Again, we have to go down here to property pane, add this guy here, right? So that's property pane drop down, and this is going to be test one. So if you want to render this out, you will go into, oh, what do you have to do? You're missing a step, Deshaun. You're missing a step. So go into web part properties, define it here. Now that's going to be a string. It's just a drop down, right? And it'll be interesting, like, you know, if this, you know, I assume this is the return type. If that drop down was, you know, Boolean values, like if you had a yes or no drop down, I guess it's, in that case, it still will return a true. But, you know, what if you had, you know, enter to drop down, you actually want an int to return, you know, how would that work? So I assume this is the return type versus the property type, but, you know, I would just have to play around with that to prove if it's true or false. So these are options, you know, it's just like a standard select that you do. You know, you got the key value. So the text is going to be display. The key is going to be, I assume the key is the value return. This is going to be interesting. Let's see what happens. So I got my test2 defined. Let's go here. You know, I should get some IntelliSense love. I do. Save this off. Any solid dots? Nope. Build error. Okay. Drop down. Label drop down. Test2. Let me see. What do we do for drop down? Do we do anything special? Test2 is a string value. Right? I thought we did string. And then test2, the way you call it out is that way. And then test2 string if you want to set it in the manifest. All right, let's see. What did I do wrong? Test2 string value. Oh, I didn't save it. Solid dot. It was hidden. Got it. All right, so I save that now. Undefined because I don't have a default value. And then there's my drop down options. Oh, look at that. So the key is the return value. The text is the display value. Good. As expected. Right? Text is display, key is the value return. So if we wanted 1 to be returned, we'll just turn this to 1, save it, and then, oops, that was too quick. And do, I mean, as far as like developing, this cycle right here, I mean, of course we haven't went through, you know, all the steps to deploy it to production and all the other stuff, but this cycle right here is just so much fluent, so much easier. I mean, especially if you're dealing with WSP. So you kind of got some of this when dealing with add-ins, especially if you set up your project correctly. If you had all your JavaScript in the add-in, you had to deploy it in order to see a change in the JavaScript. Have mercy on you. I know you know, that was a very cumbersome pain process. Even in the add-in, I would have a JS like in a styles library or something like that. So that way I can modify the JS without having to redefine or redeploy the add-in. So I kind of saw that, you know, initially up front. And I think a lot of developers saw that initially up front. But this process here, just the fact that we're not even touching the tenant yet, and you can just be, you can actually be on the plane. And that's the beauty of this. Like you can be on the plane off the grid, right? No Wi-Fi, just coding away, getting your framework right, getting everything templated out, setting up your structure, you know, doing some high-level tests, even, you know, working with JSON documents, right? Even if you wanted to do like an AJAX that went to a local JSON file, pulling all that in, working with the right JSON and all that sort of good stuff, you can do all that offline. And then once you get connected, and then you can just go ahead and verify with the real data and all this other good stuff. So a really cool, I'm liking this a lot. I mean, this is just a really, really cool format. So that's it for now. I just wanted to do a deep dive into those properties, walk around on, you know, what I've learned so far as like how this thing was carved out, and really just start adding in different properties and stuff like that. But I'm sold. I mean, I'm super excited about this. I cannot wait until the modern sites come out and those modern pages are available. I know, at the time of this video, they released the integration with O365 groups, and it sounds as if on first release tenant will only see it if you had an O365 group created. And ever since that announcement, personally in my MSDN tenant, I've been having a hard time with creating an O365 group. I actually get an error. But either way, so next video, let's jump into working with the Hello World web part, interacting with the actual SharePoint APIs, REST APIs. And I think instead of deploying this locally, the next step would be to deploy this in the actual dev tenant. So I'll see you in the next video. Take care.